Honored survivors, dear students, parents, family, and friends, welcome to this year's premiere screening of Names Not Numbers, a movie in the making, by the Hillel Torah class of 2020. This is the 10th year of Hillel Torah students recording oral histories of Holocaust survivors. In total, our students have recorded 86 stories of survivors and one liberator. 390 students Kanahara have participated in this program so far. Tonight you will have a chance to hear the stories of Magda Brown, Zichronah Livracha, Ernest Fruehauf, Ruth Gilbert, Rodi Glass, Inga Leib, Fran Silverberg, and Lillian Zoloto. We thank our survivors for going to great lengths to share their stories with us, often under difficult circumstances. Tonight is especially poignant as we remember Mrs. Magda Brown, who just passed away on July 7th, a few weeks after her 93rd birthday. Magda was actually a two-time Names Not Numbers alumna, and recently she actually shared her story with our students on Yom HaShoah via Zoom. It was a privilege knowing Magda, and we will remember her always. Due to current circumstances, we are taking a different approach to this year's screening. Graduates and their parents are viewing the film outdoors, socially distant on the lawn of the school, and our honored survivors and broader community are watching together in the safety of their own homes. This new format has actually will enable hundreds of people to watch the film at the same time, and even more to watch it later on. Please feel free to share the link with family and friends. Names Not Numbers is a major endeavor which takes many, many people to make it come together. First of all, a huge yasher koach to all our graduates, the class of 2020, for the incredible dedication and sincerity that you've shown throughout this project. Even though this was not the end of your 8th grade that you had anticipated, you still rose to the occasion, showed tremendous resilience and maturity, and always focused on what was important. In fact, just prior to this evening screening, you visited your survivors and brought them each dinner and some special gifts as a token of your love and respect. We are so proud of you. A huge thank you, of course, goes to our project coordinators, Lori Pinchot and Lori Haston, for doing such an incredible job on this year's film for a 10th year in a row. You've given our students a tremendous gift that they will carry with them for the rest of their lives and share with their own children. Thank you to Avi and Jenny Rothner for so generously sponsoring this year's Names Not Numbers project in memory of Jenny's grandparents, Sala and Sidney Kirshner, Zichronam Livracha. Sala was a Holocaust survivor who suffered through 7 labor camps over a 5-year period. Sidney was actually an American soldier who liberated her camp in the spring of 1945. They shared a love story that spanned 72 years. Their story is actually told in a beautiful book called Sala's Gift, which I highly recommend and actually available on Amazon. The later years of their lives were intertwined with telling their unique story and spreading the message of human perseverance. Sala and Sidney recently passed away at the ages of 94 and 96. May the zchut of this year's project be an aliyah for their neshamot. Thank you to Sandra, our incredible filmmaker, and to Dov Shandalov, Ed Plotkin, Maureen Sweer, Chaya Gordon-Burston, and Pavel Redzina for all your work behind the scenes to ensure a successful project for this year's film. Thank you to all those who have supported the film up until now, and to all those who would like to continue to support it, please call the school office or visit the school website. And one final thank you, and that is to Tova Rosenberg. Tova, you are the creator and the visionary for this entire Names Not Numbers project. We wouldn't be here tonight without you, and it is my honor now to introduce Tova to say a few words.
Tell me a fact and I'll learn. Tell me a truth and I'll believe. But tell me a story and it will live in my heart forever. The Names Not Numbers Oral History Film Documentary Project is remembering the stories of the Holocaust and is telling the story of the Holocaust for the world to hear, for the world to learn, and to inspire future generations to combat anti-Semitism and all forms of hatred and intolerance. This unique project is in its 16th year. Over 2,500 survivors and 6,000 students have participated in it worldwide. The students were instructed by teachers and professionals. They learned interviewing techniques from journalists. They learned filming techniques and editing skills from documentary filmmakers. The students interviewed, filmed, and edited the 2-hour interviews with each survivor to make 20-minute oral histories that are compiled in the Names Not Numbers documentary at the school. You're about to view the documentary Names Not Numbers, a movie in the making. This film chronicles the students as they are being trained by the professionals and includes their reflections. In it is embedded approximately 10 minutes from each interview. This is the students' work, their filmed and edited interviews. Through this project, our students are preserving history, and they are the witnesses to the witnesses.
I looked outside, and here were young German people carrying with them sections of Torah scrolls, throwing them on the ground and dancing on them and putting them on fire.
Every day, people were called randomly, and they were told that they were just being sent to labor camps for the German war effort. Eventually, people began to realize that the transports were actually going to death camps.
It was amazing to hear firsthand from an Auschwitz survivor and to hear all the experiences that she had to go through.
I asked the people who have been there longer, could you tell me how soon we're gonna see my relatives who were that away? These people raised their arms and pointed to the 5 chimneys and said, that is where your parents are. We were in total denial.
I don't talk about it anymore. You're the first one that hears about it for a long time.
I think it was really cool to meet a survivor because now I've met someone and I've heard the story from someone that's experienced it firsthand, and it's inspiring to hear their story and how they survived, something that not a lot of people survived.
If you could say anything to the Optavik family right now, what would you say to them?
How could I thank you for giving me a life?
We showed Hitler that we survived and we were going to replace all these people. And we're going to be strong and they cannot defeat us.
This is the 10th year of the Names Not Numbers project. The fact that we're able to still do it 10 years later with you guys who were just in nursery at the time is just an incredible privilege. There are people in the world today, and not a few, who actually are going around saying that this never happened. So the people who you're going to be speaking to, these are actual people who experienced these events, and you are going to be that link to the entire future, not just of your children, your community, really for the world. So that's why it's more important than ever to remember this time period of the Holocaust, to make sure that it never happens again, in whatever form that may be, whether to the Jewish people or to anyone else.
You are now joining the approximately 6,000 students worldwide that have been part of this project. And there are over 2,000 World War II veterans and survivors who've been part of the project, and over 350 films. This is 80 years. September 1st, 1939 was the outbreak of World War II, and 75 years to the liberation of Auschwitz, January 27th, 1945. Survivors were your age. You are the tail end of this generation that can hear the survivor stories from them. So you are listening to history, you are making history, and you are preserving history.
Names Not Numbers will change the way you view the Holocaust completely. It will change the level of respect you have for every person who survived. I learned about my own family through this project and how my own great-grandparents survived the Holocaust and were resilient despite their challenges.
Our generation is so lucky to still have the opportunity to learn from inspiring, strong, and powerful survivors. One day we will be passing on their stories. Savor every moment. It's going to be a meaningful and memorable experience.
Well, my great-grandmother, her entire family except for her and her sister, perished in the Holocaust, and she passed away around a year ago. This project is extra meaningful to me because I have that personal connection.
So Mrs. Hayes and I are first going to give you your folders. In your folders you have many pieces of important information. This is the Inga Leib group, so we have, and you already kind of know, Gabriella, Ethan Sugar, Abby Singer.
Tova Rosenberg's research workshop showed us that we have to be prepared before the interview, because if we go into the interview not knowing any information about our survivor's story or the past, then we won't be able to ask them the right questions.
The more information you know, the better your questions are going to be, and obviously the better the documentary is going to be.
It's really important that we research before we conduct our interview so we can ask helpful questions that will help tell the story of the survivor.
My favorite part has been reading about my survivor and figuring out how she survived and lived through the Holocaust.
We had a journalist come in to teach us how to craft questions and interview properly.
You are some of the last witnesses to some of the history that you're going to be documenting here. People who survived the Holocaust. And that's kind of the nature of journalism in general, is being a witness to things that happen. Good interviews often lead you somewhere you didn't expect to go. You'll hear something you didn't know was going to happen. They may surprise you with something. You want to jump on that. You want to say, please tell us more about that. Or what did that feel like? As I said, you're creating a historic interview that could be viewed a century, 2 centuries from now. And make no mistake, you're just students, but the people you're talking to are saying things that will be of interest to history. Those people in the future may know even less than you do. So your job is to act as an agent for your viewers.
We learned what not to do in an interview and how to make the interview more clean.
We recently had a filming session with our filmmaker, Sandra, and she taught us how to use the cameras and how to zoom in, zoom out, and we learned a lot about cameras I did not know.
So the first thing you're going to want to know is how to compose an image. It's scientifically proven that if it's off-center, then it's more visually appealing. If you're in a medium shot and you hear that the survivor is getting more and more emotional, we actually then want to start zooming in. And now we've told the audience, this is an important moment. This is something we need to focus in on, and that's the effect that it has on the big screen as well.
My experience playing around with the cameras, I thought it was really cool. I've never done anything like that, and to have that experience and that information is really, really cool and helpful.
Today, the whole 8th grade class went on a field trip to Park Plaza, and we got a chance to go meet all of the older people who live there.
We're from Hillel Torah. These are 8th graders that are working right now on a very important project called Names Not Numbers. As they're researching the Holocaust, the Shoah, and they're interviewing survivors. They're obviously happy to miss some class. We're also here to sing a little bit.
At Park Plaza, I saw my great-grandmother who lives there. It was really nice for me because it's really important to me that I spend time with her because it's like special that I have her.
My survivor is Rodi and she's from Amsterdam, Holland.
I'm going to be interviewing Inga Leib. I'm really excited about it. Inga Leib is 98 years old, which is like a really big blessing, and I'm really excited to get to talk to her and hear her whole story in more detail than I already know.
Rodi flew all the way from Florida to Chicago just for this interview so she could teach others about her story.
I'm interviewing Magda Brown today because Magda fell. We have to go to the rehab facility to take the interview there. and she's not feeling well, but we're gonna go anyway because she really wants to do it, and she's really excited. During the war, Magda was loaded onto a cattle car on her 17th birthday, and I just want to learn more about what her time was like during that.
She also got interviewed 10 years ago for Names Not Numbers, and it's really special that she's still alive and she can still share her story 10 years after.
I will be interviewing Inga Leib. Inga was sick last week, and she's also 98, so we're very happy that she was able to come and be interviewed. I'm excited to interview and learn more parts of her story that we don't know yet.
I will be interviewing Franz Silverberg. I'm feeling really nervous just because feel like I might mess something up. But at the same time, I'm really excited just because I've never had an opportunity to talk to a survivor in an environment like this.
My name is Ernest Fruehauf. I was born March 24th, 1929, in the city of Würzburg. I lived in the smaller town of Kitzengen. It was on the River Main. I think about the time I was born, there may have been 300 Jewish families in the town. They had a synagogue, which was a pretty sizable, beautiful building. The main rabbi to begin with was a Rabbi Wohlgemuth. I had a younger brother, Norbert, and I had a little sister whose name was Hannah. We lived with our grandparents. I lived upstairs of a large cafe which my grandfather had established in the early part of the 1900s. We had all kinds of customers, many of them, they came from all over. I met people in this country who lived in Germany at that time and actually remembered going to that cafe, Frankenberger Cafe.
Names and numbers, Inga Leib.
My name is Inga Leib. I was born in Worms am Rhein, Germany. November 15th, 1921. You know how old I am?
98.
98 is correct. My parents owned shoe stores. I have had a brother. I went to a private school. Had a Jewish teacher come to the school. It was beautiful. It was a small town the size of Highland Park. We had our own synagogue, and there were about 200 Jewish families in that town.
This is Names Not Numbers, Ruth Gilbert.
My name is Ruth Gilbert. I was born in the city of Lodz in Poland in the year 1938, November 19th. My mother was a stay-at-home mom, and my dad had a shoe factory. It was a very profitable business. From what I understand, the Jewish community was a closely knit, fairly prosperous community. There was a lively scene with Yiddish theater and concerts and lectures.
Names on numbers, Fran Silverberg.
My name is Frances Silverberg. I was born in a small village in Poland, Sechova, in 1932. And there were 7 siblings, wonderful parents, only maybe 15 families in the town. I went to Polish school, and we went to Hebrew classes. We had a small synagogue, it was a house, and we had the cheder there. And my father was the chazan, he had a good voice, so we used to just love to go to cheder and have fun.
My name is Magda Perlstein Brown. I was born in Miskolc, Hungary, June 11, 1927. I had a brother who was 5 years older than I. My parents had a meat market and a delicatessen. My school taught a regular Hungarian curriculum, but every morning There was a rabbi who conducted religious classes every morning. The Shabbos was observed to the fullest. The family gathered for dinner, and matter of fact, this is where I learned charity. My mother would prepare a little basket filled with enough for 2 of her old-maid friends who were barely making a living. And that was tzedakah number 1. And that was a routine every weekend.
Names not numbers, Lillian Zoloto.
My name is Lillian Zoloto. I was born in Belgium, in Brussels, February 17, 1938. My parents were Renee, in Polish. Her name was Ruchla, and my father's name was Joseph. They both came from Poland. They married, and then I was born before the war. I'm an only child. I know I went to nursery school. Everything seemed fine.
My name is Rodi Glass. I was born in Amsterdam, Holland. My mother worked in my grandfather's store. He had leather and shoemaker supplies stores. And my father ended up marrying my mom and working in the family business. My home life was wonderful. And I was the first grandchild, so I was a novelty. My 5th birthday was the last birthday I had that I really celebrated with pleasure. After that, birthdays have not meant much to me because it was the last time that all the family was together. I still remember my mother was saving up ration coupons so she could make pastries, and my uncles, 2 of my uncles had made a Punch and Judy. I don't know if you know what that is, with puppets, and they had made us all by hand, and it was the most glorious birthday I had, and the last good one. My grandfather went and bought a bicycle. You know, everybody in Holland rides bikes. And he went and he bought a bicycle for me. And I can just see him, still see him in my mind's eye, riding this bicycle down the street with his legs spread, you know, because it was low, it was a 2-wheeler, but it was, and I think I used the bike once and then the Germans took it away.
Maybe 36, 37, I began to encounter problems with the non-Jewish students because as I was walking to my school, they were walking to their school, and they would start to try to beat us up. So the parents and the teachers and everybody else, they agreed that we would start the Jewish parochial school 15 minutes after public schools began, and we would be left out 15 minutes before public schools were released so we could make our way home.
We were only 3 Jewish students in my class, and they spit at us, and in the winter they threw snowballs at us, and we couldn't throw them back. We had to just stand there and take them, and we couldn't spit back either.
Poland generally was a very anti-Semitic country, but I don't know that my family was that affected by it because we were fairly well-to-do and lived in a nice neighborhood and were fairly assimilated so that we didn't fit into that stereotype.
I only had one Polish girlfriend. Her name was Jadzia. The children were terrible. They always yelled, Żydzi do Palestini, Jews to Israel, go to Israel.
I understand there was a lady whose name was Lisa who had watched me at some points during the time that my mom was working. These were people that had moved from Germany to Belgium because they were very much against the Nazi party. They were actually communists. And they had come to live in Belgium because They didn't want to be in Germany. So she took care of me when I was little, but I don't remember it.
You know, nobody ever said dirty Jew or whatever, and they didn't do anything until we were occupied by the Germans in 1940, and then all the bad feelings came to the surface.
Let's face reality. Anti-Semitism was there, and unfortunately, it never disappeared. Let's put it that way.
As part of our Holocaust class with Mrs. Pinchot, we reenacted the Evian Conference.
In July 1938, at the suggestion of President Franklin Roosevelt, officials from 32 countries met at the Royal Hotel in the French resort town of Evian to see what they could do to help the Jews of Germany and Austria.
Some millions of people are without a country. The number is increasing daily. There is a catastrophic human suffering ahead.
In my town, we can't buy milk for our children because signs say no Jews and dogs allowed.
Half of us have been fired from our jobs, fired and unable to find other work. We were fired for one reason and one reason only. We are Jews.
We are ready and willing to leave our homes in Germany and make a new start in any country that will open its doors to us.
We sympathize with the situation of the refugees, but our Prime Minister has said none is too many.
France has reached an extreme point of saturation. Regarding admissions of refugees, we simply have no more room.
No country can be expected to accept people who are deprived of their means of subsistence before they're able to enter it.
We welcome the Jewish refugees. We need people for agriculture work, and we will take 100,000 people to live and work in our country.
It is very difficult for countries to accept penniless immigrants. This conference stands adjourned. The Nazis set the house aflame and the free world barred the doors. It was clear that no one wanted the Jews. They had no allies and 32 nations turned their backs on them. Their fate was now in the hands of Germany alone.
In the sked, we kept on hearing people's roles of saying, no, we have no more room, we can't afford, we don't want the Jews, and we saw that these people who were later on to be survivors or sadly perished had no hope for them in the world.
I think we could use this information how when a group of people, if they're classified by their race or their religion or anything, is being kicked out of somewhere or have nowhere to go, we should let them in because we don't want to repeat the Holocaust happen to anyone.
The Nazis came to my town in November 1938. My life has changed completely. We had to move out of the house because the Nazi guard was in front and nobody could go in or out.
Early in 1938, any Jewish people who still had a business were sent a letter which said that the Nazi Party has an order from now on that no Jewish family can own a business, so you have to sell it. We could no longer go to the movie theater. We couldn't go to a park to go on a slide. We couldn't sit on benches. We were pretty much restricted in terms of what we could do.
Kristallnacht, that was on the 10th of November in my town.
Kristallnacht, that was a major event.
It was just a regular day. Upon the rising, we saw there was some commotion going on.
All of a sudden, I hear all this noise outside. The next thing I knew, the side door of the cafe is broken into, and I hear some glass windows being broken in, and a whole bunch of people outside making a terrific ruckus. One of the non-Jewish owners across the street ran out and said, "Don't break those windows. The business is already owned by an Aryan," so they stopped breaking the windows. The Nazi Party set the synagogue on fire.
I saw the synagogue go up in flames. That was a horrible experience.
In the morning, everything in the interior burned, but not the southern turret. So the Nazis came back at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and they put it on fire again just to burn that other turret. I looked outside, and here were young German people with torches, carrying with them sections of Torah scrolls. And they were throwing them on the ground and dancing on them and putting them on fire. And I remember saying to myself, well, heck, these are Christian people. This is what happens with hate. With hate, there is no rationale at all. They came storming up the steps, and they arrested my grandfather and my father.
And that was the last day I saw my father.
What you need to survive, you needed luck and you needed friends. The war started in September, of course, and now there was rationing. Well, we didn't need the meat stamps, we didn't buy treif meat, but what my father did as he went along on this route, he knew people who were customers and he knew people who were honest to goodness good Germans. They weren't Nazis. And so when he took the bag of garbage in one hand, he would at the same time give the woman the meat stamps, and she in turn would give my father maybe a butter stamp or a milk stamp, so we got stuff we could survive on it. She was tickled pink to have meat stamps, and we were happy we got a butter or a milk stamp. My father was sent, we found out later, to Dachau. The Germans kept perfect records. They came across the actual concentration camp entry records. And here is my father, number 30637. It has last name, first name, day he was born, where he was born, his marital status, how many kids in the family, the profession, and and his address, all down there. It was the 4th day of Hanukkah in December. There was a knock on the door downstairs very early in the morning. And I thought, my God, what's going on? We all woke up. What's happening now? Well, it turned out to be my father, and he's calling, you know. So my mother went downstairs, let him in. My father looked like death warmed over. First of all, he had a prison suit on, black and gray prison suit. Secondly, his hair had been shaved off. Thirdly, he looked like he lost about 20 pounds. I mean, you know, these concentration camps were horrendous. My father said, we've got to get out of here. So it took from December 38 until maybe the spring of 1939 that they were able to get enough people together to sponsor us. And they said, well, you now have a proper account and you're eligible for a visa, but you know there is a quota. Everybody's trying to get out of Germany. We won't be able to grant you a visa at the present rate till maybe May of 1941. That's 2 years away. Everybody except one other little boy who got out a month later than we did, and the 3 of us, everybody else was killed in Belzec.
The Nazis immediately, as soon as they came into Poland, started to herd all the Jews into a ghetto. I was about a year old. Being in the ghetto was very, very difficult. Families had to share apartments, and if it's that crowded, it becomes very dirty. We had very, very meager ration cards. So there was a lot of starvation, and because of the poor hygiene and starvation, disease was rampant in the ghetto and people were dying.
In 1939, when the war broke out, the Soviets came into our town. When they occupied the town, the Jews were very welcome. I mean, we had no problems at all. And that's why nobody escaped. The Germans entered Sechova shortly after the Russians left. A little scary when they marched into town. We were all shook up. We stayed in our home until they moved all the Jews out to ghetto. Rokitno. All our family moved into an uncle that lived there. In one house, we had about 4 or 5 families. In the ghetto, we had to wear yellow Jewish stars stitched on the clothing. And once a month, they took everybody out and they counted the people to make sure that nobody escaped. I was lucky. There was a Polish cook that cooked for the German army. I knew when to come. She would peel the potatoes and chop up some potatoes. When I would arrive, she would spill it outside the window, And I would pick up the potato peelings in my apron and bring it home, so we had that. We lived in the ghetto for, I would say, about a year.
At about the age 17, the Nazis came into Hungary, and from that point on, everything shattered. That was the beginning of the end. It started with taking the Jewish people out of the smaller communities, suburban areas, into the big city. And then they designated a section of the city that became the ghetto. I lived in the big city, and as it happens, the ghetto was part of my home. The home held 6 people, and now my home became the residency for 40 people. People were totally exhausted, come on foot from the outlying areas. Because remember, I am a teenager, I had my own room, I had my own stuff, and all of a sudden, none of that exists any longer. They were restricting us to go back to school, restricting us to own our businesses. So actually, outside the ghetto, in our life, everything stopped. My mother said, I am not going to leave my siblings and my nephews, nieces, the family in general. So my father agreed, and that's how we remained in Hungary.
After some neighbors across the way had been dragged out in the middle of the night, and my mother had witnessed this, they realized that it would not be prudent for me to stay home. So this is when they really appealed to Lisa and her husband, and they asked if there was any place where I could be placed for safekeeping when I'm 4 years old. They explained to me that there was this bad man, Hitler, who did not like people like us. And my mom said that at that moment, I became more fearful. And I think that's really when I understood that there was some danger, and my parents were trying to do the best for me.
The first time my mom and dad and I were arrested or picked was in September of 1942. They just gave my mother time to dress me, and they put us on a truck, and from the truck to the train. Then we had to walk, I think, 5 to 10 kilometers in the night, in the dark, to the camp. And that was very frightening. I remember that as a child. I mean, my mother was holding on to my hand because we were still in shock from being arrested, and on to Holland.
We went to the Holocaust Museum, and we learned about everyone's different stories, and I really liked going into the cattle car. It was just a different feeling because you know that they were in there and they were starving and they were all crammed in there, and just when you walk in there you get that feeling of sadness and how they felt, and clearly it's nothing to what they were feeling.
Before I just thought it was just maybe like a train or something, but once I actually got to go into the Holocaust Museum and see this was just much worse, but it's better than just seeing it maybe on a picture because you even got to go inside of it.
There were on average between 80 to 100 people that were put into each rail car. So what does that mean? Very, very crowded. You can't even move. You can't even sit down. If you were sitting down, you were taking turns with someone. What else is missing from the rail car?
Water, light.
Water, light, windows, a bathroom, somewhere to sit. Now the Jews that were taken into those rail cars didn't know how long they were going to be there and didn't know where they were going. Sometimes it was 2 days, sometimes it was 3 days, sometimes it could be as much as 5 days, because all those cars led to Poland. There were many people that died in those rail cars. And then they would toss the bodies out when they were stopping. A very, very harrowing train ride. I can tell you that when our survivors speak about it, they remember the details, and it is so difficult to hear how horrible that was.
I found out that they're going to take the Jewish men away. And I ran and I told my father, please leave, take a train somewhere, which was a mistake to do that I know now, and go away because they're arresting the Jewish men. So it was only my mother and me left. A little later, hundreds of people ran up the stairs, stormed into our apartment, and I thought at that moment I was going to be killed. And they ran into the house and they threw everything out of the house, like the salt and the flour and the sugar and the oil all on the floor, cut up feather pillows and threw them out of the window, slashed paintings, whatever they could do, they harmed everything. It was a nightmare. So we couldn't stay in our apartment. We had to leave, my mother and I. My father took a train, and on that train he was arrested, and he went to Dachau. And it happened to be on my birthday that he wrote a postcard, and he said, please send me money. That was the only thing we have left, that's it. My dad was 6 weeks in Dachau. He had to walk naked in the snow, and he could not take it, and he died in Dachau. But that time we got the body back, and also whatever he had in his pocket, they were returned to us. And we were able to bury him in his hometown where he was born.
Where did you go after your apartment was destroyed?
To my aunt who lived in another town, because it wasn't that dangerous there. It's because we lived in a smaller town. My brother was in the United States already. My mother sent him there. My mother thought it's best for me to just go on a train and leave Germany. So she gave me $20 and a suitcase packed with things that I needed and sent me on to France. I was crying all the way because I had to leave my whole family and I had nobody except my suitcase. That's it. There was a cousin in France and I went there. How old was I? 15, I think. I was only there 6 weeks because I couldn't stay longer. The government wouldn't let me stay longer.
How did you decide to go to London?
Because we had a name of a lady that takes in refugees, and that's all I had, a name. The train ride to London was bad. I called this lady's name, and then she told me to come to her house, and I took a cab and went there with my suitcase. Her name is Mrs. Guggenheim. She helped the Jewish people, and it was a big house, and there was a huge table in the dining room, and people ate on this dining room and table. Very nice. My mother came the day before the war broke out. She was lying on the floor, completely exhausted from all what she went through. And then I was happy I had my mother. My mother and I were there for a month in London.
Every day, people were called randomly, and they were told that they were just being sent to labor camps for the German war effort. Eventually, people began to realize that the transports were actually going to death camps. My father heard about that also. He realized that if he didn't do something very quickly, my mother and I and he would die. So my father was able to get fake passports for my mother and for me. He could have never passed as a Pole. We had to change our names, and my father's plan was to go and join the Russian army and try to survive that way. We had been in the ghetto by then about 3 years. My father used his money to bribe the guard so that he would look the other way. When we left the ghetto, my father picked me up and he kissed me and he hugged me and he said, "The war will soon be over and we will be together again." But that was the last time that I saw my father. And he went one way and my mother and I went another. We got on the train to go to the city of Lublin. In Lublin, nobody knew us, so we could pass as Poles. My father had arranged with a Polish family. They agreed to keep us in spite of the danger that it brought to them. And they were a very decent family. We led a totally Christian life. They went to church and to Mass, and of course we did too. At some point, the Germans came and arrested the father. For what reason, I don't know. And he was sent to a labor camp. The wife and her children decided to leave Lublin, and my mother and I found ourselves on the street. My mother didn't know what to do next. She came upon the idea that we should just get on a train and ride the trains from one end of Poland to the other. There were no bathrooms, so as a result, we were dirty. My mother has told me that she took lice off my body by the handfuls. We had virtually nothing with us. Nazi officers would keep getting on the train at the different stations, and they were looking for Jews. And my mother was petrified that they would recognize us. After about 6 weeks of riding the trains, my mother couldn't take it anymore. Just by chance, my mother struck up a conversation with a lady that was Mrs. Szymanski. And my mother told her that she was a widow and she had no home. She didn't tell her we were Jewish. And Mrs. Szymanski graciously invited my mother to come to their house. She said, "We have room, you can have a bath, you can have a hot meal, and you can sleep in a bed until my husband comes home." Well, that of course saved our life. And then Mr. Szymanski came home, and somehow he guessed what his wife had not, and that was that we were Jewish. He could not jeopardize his family for keeping Jews. To his credit, he could have turned us in, and Mr. Szymanski suggested that my mother get a job as a live-in maid. And she found a job immediately as a maid with a wealthy Polish family in a beautiful section of Warsaw in a very, very beautiful apartment. My mother was afraid to let me out of her sight. When she thought that someone suspected us, like a neighbor or a friend that would come to visit, she would look in the paper and quickly find another job and move to another neighborhood. The last job we had was with a count and a countess who lived in a suburb of Warsaw, Komorów. They were an older couple. They were very kind to us. We had a very nice room and we had very nice food. The danger there, however, was that every weekend the Count and the Countess entertained high-ranking Nazi officers who, had they known that my mother and I were Jewish, would have shot us on the spot. But they didn't know, they didn't suspect. They, in fact, liked me a lot. I was a cute little girl, and they would play with me and bring me little gifts. One of the officers was playing with me, and he asked me if I knew how a gun worked. I said no, and he said, I'll show you. And he took me upstairs, and he shot the gun off the balcony into the garden. My mother was in the kitchen, and she heard the shot. And of course, she thought that I had been shot. And she ran upstairs, white as a ghost, and she was trembling, expecting to find me lying in a pool of blood. But instead, she saw me jumping up and down and telling her that now I know how a gun works. So they worked for the underground. That was one reason why they had those Nazi officers in their house. Whatever information they could get from them, they would relay it to the Polish underground.
They lined up for counting, and there was a train waiting to be loaded. We heard a shot, and then they started packing the people into the wagons. And my mother said to us, "Run, children, save yourselves." So I grabbed my two sisters and by the hand, and we started running. And my sister Betty lost the shoe, so we stopped to pick up the shoe, and a young Gestapo guy aimed the rifle at her, and then he changed his mind. And so we were able to run into the woods. I was 9, Sheila was about 3, and Betty was 4.5. I was feeling very scared. I ran with my two sisters, and my brother found us in the woods. And thanks to my brother, we're here. We ran, and the farmer let us into the barn. And we were exhausted and tired. He said, I'm going into the house and I'll bring you some food. And he locked the door. So my brother looked out the cracks from the barn, and he saw that the farmer ran to town. So we knew he was going to tell the Germans that to sell us for a pound of salt. It was an old barn. My brother knocked out some boards, and we crawled out in the back and ran into the field. We pulled out some hay, and we all crawled into the haystacks. And then we heard the Germans with dogs come. And just like a miracle, it started pouring. And the dogs lost the smell. They couldn't find us, and so the Germans turned around and went away. When it got dark, we got out from the hay and ran deeper into the woods. My brother would build a little teepee, build a fire, and we would lay on the ground. No blankets, no nothing, just with the clothes on our backs.
What did you eat in the forest?
Whatever my brother was able to scrounge at night. He would go into the fields and dig up some potatoes. So we'd bake a potato a day. Not much. And then winter settled in, and we started getting frostbitten toes. My brother went into town, brought 2 men who picked us up, the little ones and us, and took us into their house. And the only reason that we were safe there was my brother-in-law came over with the partisans with the rifles, and they told the people that if they'll hurt us, the whole town will be killed out. And the Germans were really petrified of the partisans. My brother contacted typhoid fever, and the farmer that took us in got sick and he died. So they kicked us out of the house. And then we wound up in a place called Bitom. There we found some Jewish people. The Germans lost. However, they were still bombing the towns. And so when the sirens started, we all ran into the bunkers. A bomb fell on the bunker, and all it did was break the piece of wood, and my brother got scraped a little bit. Luckily, the bomb was a dud. So here's another miracle.
The time of evacuation came, but we didn't know what that means. They just said, you're gonna leave this area. And we couldn't figure out why in heaven's name making us walk all the way several miles into a brickyard. At the brickyard, it's adjacent to the railroad track, and on my 17th birthday, they loaded us into a railroad car. We were as many as 70 to 75 human beings crowded into that space. At that time, my parents are still with me, and in order to let them sit on the wooden floor, I stood for 3 solid days. Out of the railroad car, there are 2 separated columns. 5 Nazi officers are facing us, and we are 5 abreast, lined up like soldiers. And they point at you this way. So I follow the orders. My father is pointed that way. And I waved to them, I'll see you later. Keep going. And by the next column, my mother is taken away from me. We get into this camp location. I asked the people who have been there longer, I said, could you tell me how soon we're gonna see my relatives who were that away? These people raised their arms and pointed to the 5 chimneys and said, that is where your parents are. We were in total denial. This is the 20th century. People are not tortured or killed to die like in that fashion. Now the room would hold, sleeping on the floor, 250, 300 human beings, like sardines in the can. Neighbors' body heat was our blanket, or our warmth. And we were so tired by nighttime and hungry that we just literally passed out.
What was life like during those 2 to 3 months in Auschwitz?
I hate to use that word, but as they describe hell on earth. We got to Auschwitz June 11th, and we were selected out by August 8th. Out of Auschwitz, I ended up in Germany, and the ammunition factory where they took us manufactured rockets and bombs. Then all of a sudden, we got the order that we are evacuating this location. No explanations. So they put us with some Nazi guards on the open road. During the night, we would literally sleep on the damp grounds in the ditches. But we were so tired that we just literally passed out.
The family that took me in and became my rescuers are called Jean. Josine was his wife, and they had a daughter and a son. They had never met Jewish people before. They said, you know, I don't understand. They call them dirty Jews. And look at how clean she is, and look at how clean her clothes are. So they told me the next morning, they said I was to call them aunt and uncle, and they were going to explain to the neighbors that I was the child of a relative who had come to live with them indefinitely because the parents were ill and they were in a hospital, and there was no knowing when I would be able to return to my family, so that I would remain with them. And that is how they explained to the neighbors the appearance of this little blonde, blue-eyed girl that fit in with their family, but appeared, you know, at age 4 suddenly as a new member of the Up to Bake family. They also told me that we were not to speak of my parents because it would be dangerous for their family and it would be dangerous for my parents. So while at first I know that I was quite tearful to be away from my parents, I easily adapted because they were so kind. As time went on, and we never spoke of my parents, I pretty much forgot my parents. So that by the time my parents came to pick me up 4 years later, they were complete strangers to me. Jean, he would take his daughter and I to this little cabin that he had, and we were always thrilled. And when we got there, he would tell us that we couldn't come into the cabin at all because he was busy. Well, unbeknownst to us, we were a decoy for him. He was printing material in this cabin, and underneath all the vegetables and whatever potatoes he brought back would be some documents, papers that he was disseminating. We went to church, and eventually I was baptized. In 1945, my parents started coming around, and here were these strangers, and I was told that these were my parents, and of course, I was shocked. I thought this was my family. The Abdebeek was my family. So I just felt very bad, and they explained to me that these were my real parents, and I felt very conflicted. I mean, did I belong to the Abdebeeks? Did I belong to my family, my parents? I was 8 years old then, and I think that the Abdebeeks didn't want to give me up, and my parents didn't know how to take me back. And so I went and I stayed with my parents, but my parents tried to explain to me that I was Jewish, and this is how it was dropped like a bomb on me.
In Westerbork, they took us out, and then they yelled and screamed, and you have to go to this barrack, and you have to go to this barrack. And it was just a mess. And then we got assigned a bed. They were 3-story bunk beds. They were made of metal, and the mattresses were very thin straw, and there were a lot of lice and a lot of vermin. And in the barracks, the people had a tendency to steal from each other because they made people bad. You know, they brought out the worst in the people. The Germans would walk into the barrack with a list of names. They were being sent to their death. The screaming and crying, even as a child, I can still hear that. Because families were being torn apart. And they sent away 1,000 people a week. So that is a nightmare. You always lived in fear. You never know when they're going to knock on the door. We had not enough food. We couldn't go out. You were in prison, but you weren't in prison. There is a guy in Amsterdam, and he will get a paper, and that is called a sper, 120,000 guilders, which is like $120,000 a person. Well, we had 11 people. So my grandpa said, well, it's worth a chance, you know? But he was taking a gamble because you didn't know if this was for real or if the guy was just going to say thank you very much and leave or turn you into the Germans for having the money that you're not supposed to have. But we did get the sper. And it said on the bottom, this would keep you for the time being not to be sent to the east. The time being could be tomorrow, it could be an hour from now. For the time being is a very open-ended statement. We were sent to Westerbork, and after a couple of days they told us to come out to the Appellplatz, which is like the main square, and there's a table with German officers sitting behind it and with lists in front of them. And my mother looks and she sees one of the young officers. She knows him. He used to live 2 doors away from my family. And he used to hang out at my grandmother's house, and she cooked real well, and, you know, and they used to hang out. And he sees my mother, and of course he knows my mother. And he gave her the high sign not to show that she knew him. And when they came to our name on the list, they scratched our name off the list. If he had not done that, I would not be sitting here talking to you. By then, my grandfather had arranged for this speer that I was telling you about, and we got out of the camp. The second time we were picked up, the speer got us out of there again. And the third time, it was the English citizenship that got us to France. But the speer played a major role in our survival. I mean, we had nothing. I didn't have shoes to wear. My mother cut the toes off the shoes so that my feet would stick through. You know, your feet grow as a child. We had nothing, and that's how we went to Vitel too. We had nothing.
Describe the day you were liberated.
It was exciting. We were happy, but we still have a rough road ahead of us. We wound up in a camp for children. Just my brother, my two sisters, and I. It was great. It was wonderful. Life was almost normal. In fact, Ben-Gurion came to visit us, and I presented him with flowers.
I was so happy when the Russians liberated us. They were our saviors, and they were very kind to us. We got on a Russian army truck with soldiers and went to our city of Łódź, and we came to our house, which was no longer there. It was bombed out. And the Jewish agency informed my mother, when my mother went there, that my father had perished. He had never made it to Russia. He was apprehended, and he died in Treblinka. Well, it was very painful because we found out that my dad was no longer alive. Our house was no longer there.
On the next day, 2 young soldiers from the 6th Armored Division of the U.S. Army, God bless them all, found us. They were crying and we were crying. Days before, you wouldn't even dream about that. And all of a sudden, freedom is here.
Being liberated was wonderful. But then you think, what were we liberated to? We had no place to go. When the war ended, I was 9 years old. Then we were on the trains to Holland for 3 days without water, without food. And when we got there, the Dutch government was waiting for us at the station and gave us 10 guilders. Remember, my grandfather paid 120,000 for one, and a lariat, which was the most demeaning thing, and it had a D on it, which means dakloos, which in English means homeless. And my grandfather or my dad would walk down the street. Some people would say, "Oh, why did you come back? They must have killed all the good ones."
Rabbi Leibtag just led an Emunah class about the Holocaust.
When we talk about faith and the Holocaust, what does that mean, faith in the Holocaust? What did people do in the Holocaust? Did they give up faith through the Holocaust? Did they give up faith after the Holocaust? Or did they actually have more faith after what they saw? And how people struggled with Emunah.
There are many different ways to look at Emunah, and people that have gone through tragedies have a different way of viewing it, and possibly more Emunah than people that haven't gone through them. But it could also go the other way, because they might not believe in Hashem after they have a tragedy. He also said that we can't judge people based on what their Emunah is based after the Holocaust. Because it was the Holocaust and lots of people died and some people lost their faith.
Was it hard to get
permission to come here from?
Very hard. You had to have a number. And when our number came up, we were able to come in to the United States. I was sick from the day I went on the ship to the day it ended. There was a horrible vacation. And there were mines in the water then, because there was a war going on. And I was very happy to be here. We were free, let me say that.
We got the visa, I think it was May 23rd or 24th, 1941. 3 weeks later, Roosevelt closed the American consulate in Germany. So nobody could get out anymore after that. So we got by there by just 3 weeks. Well, it turned out we had some very distant relatives, friends more than anything else, who got us tickets on a ship which was leaving Lisbon in July of 1941. We could each take $10 and we could take one suitcase. And to make sure we didn't take along any bars of gold we might have had, there was a Gestapo agent who came to our apartment and he oversaw everything that we packed into these suitcases, and when we closed them, he put a Gestapo seal on each suitcase, and that was it.
Finally, in November of 1949, we set sail for the United States in an Army ship. We had to go to the town where the family who had sponsored us lived, and that was Paterson, New Jersey. I was 10, I should have been in 4th grade. I was put in 1st grade, and I was made fun of, and I was very, very unhappy, and I refused to go to school. After a few months, we moved to Chicago, and things did improve.
We arrived in the United States in April 1947. I didn't know my aunt, I didn't know my uncle. It's a new country, and we felt happy to come there, and we were in awe. The house I thought was a castle. It was just a duplex, and the family was wonderful, and they helped us in every way.
I heard from my relatives afterwards that they got a visa for me, and now they put me on a ship. My brother, he was taken to this Jewish labor commando. When I heard about his existence, I was already in Chicago. So it has taken me 20 years to bring him to America. And needless to say, it was the joy of my life.
When I first came to America, and we were living with my aunt, they were not interested in hearing anything about the war. They kept saying, well, you know, that's the past. You're in America now, and just forget about, don't talk about it.
And finally, we applied for a visa, and so my mother, father, and my grandparents, my mother's parents, came to the United States in April of 1951.
Taking like a really long interview to edit it into a short film, you just really have to figure out which parts are most important and like which parts you can learn from. What is your message to our generation?
You've got to develop in your mind and the way you behave that you're going to be a good person, that you're going to study, be good to your family, be good to your friends, make something of yourself.
A message that I have for future generations is to be kind to everyone, because we really see what hatred looked like, and it's not like a good sight to see. So just be kind.
We must be open to everyone and accept them for what they are. And if we see that someone is not doing that, to stop them, not to be a bystander, but to be an upstander.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And I'll see you March 29th, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Marvelous.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.
Think before you hate. It's so easy to hate. It's so easy to discriminate. But when you are being discriminated, that's when you get the full feeling how badly that feels.
We should all be free to express ourselves, and we shouldn't hate other people just because of their beliefs. We should accept each other and love each other despite our differences.
I hope you don't have to go through what I went through. Let's put it that way.
I hope there's peace in this world and everybody can get together, get along.
We owe something to the next person, to treat them with respect, to honor whatever their religion is, if it's not your own, and to do what's right in the world, and to stand up for your beliefs, just as the Abdebegs did.
Knowing that she was challenged so much, like at such a young age, compared to me, where like I have some challenges, but like not as many as she faced, was like really inspiring.
If the population of the world would only know that we could all enjoy each other's differences and that we could all be together, let people do their own religions and do their own customs and everything and not be critical of each other, wouldn't that be beautiful? And maybe there would never be a Holocaust again, I hope.